Harris, she has closely studied the former president's past 6 debate performances. She's also been sort of entrenched in these briefing papers going over the former president's past comments, as well as the ways that he has insulted her, so she can be prepared to respond to that. She's engaged in these mock debates with a stand-in for the former president, and she's had conversations with Hillary Clinton and President Biden, who both extensively have knowledge of debating the former president.
I think she's been crystal clear on her values, what she wants to fight for, and how she will do it. And also, you know, she talks to people, right? She's reaching out to me. She's reaching out to businesses.
She hasn't talked to the press, Gina. I mean, I know you're a surrogate, but the American people are frustrated. The media is frustrated at the amount of access anyone's gotten to her for the past 41 days. I know you've seen that. We're finally going to have a debate tomorrow night, but she sat down for one interview that was taped and then cut down, and certain little things came out from it. But it has been a master class in avoiding any questions, and nothing's been made clear by her. Maybe it's been made clear in dribs and drabs from her policymakers when it comes out in print or on off a teleprompter at one of her scripted speeches. She's been impossible to pin down on anything because she hasn't given any access. The American people deserve it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and I hear you.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I gotta tell you guys, it seems as if Kamala Harris's campaign is on the verge of collapse because the basement strategy is backfiring, okay? As Kamala Harris's momentum has come to a screeching halt, despite the fact that she got a whole lot of artificial attention and praise and glory from the mainstream liberal media who tried to make her Barack Obama. However, it has become clear that Kamala Harris is not Barack Obama. She is Kamala Harris, okay, which is not much better than Joe Biden, and it seems as if the voters are figuring that out. As we have a new bombshell poll from the liberal New York Times, a poll so liberal that they tell you how to pronounce Kamala's name as you're reading the poll, right? This poll now has Trump winning against Kamala Harris. He's beating Kamala Harris to the point where if the election was held today and these results are accurate, Trump would have a 99% chance of winning the electoral college, okay, which would make him president of the United States. Again, this is a terrible, terrible, disastrous poll for Kamala Harris, and everybody's starting to realize that, that basement strategy that they ran with Joe Biden, that's not going to cut it in this election against Trump.
Let's go ahead and get to the polls. This was big news from the New York Times. Put this up on the screen. This is considered like an A+ pollster. When this poll comes out, Washington really reacts. And boy, did they react to this one, understandably so, because it showed significant backsliding for Kamala Harris. She is now losing to Donald Trump by a single point, 47 to 48. That is within the margin of error of 3 percentage points, but obviously not the kind of numbers that Democrats want to see right now. Their commentary here, they say Mr. Trump may have had a rough month following President Biden's departure and amid the burst of excitement that Ms. Harris brought Democrats, but the polls suggest his support remains remarkably resilient. Let's put the next piece up on the screen. This is what we alluded to like 85 times in the last segment, which is they asked this question, very good question to ask. Do you feel like you still need to learn more about Kamala Harris, or do you pretty much already know what you need to know? 28%, so nearly a third of the electorate says, I feel like I need to learn more about Kamala Harris, versus 71% who say they pretty much already know what they need to know. The numbers were much lower for Trump in terms of like feeling like they needed to learn more. And if you look at these crosstabs, which let me just keep it up on the screen here for a moment, just caution you with the crosstabs because it's a smaller sample, it's a much broader margin of error, so you always take these with even more grains of salt than the overall poll numbers. But the age demographic and the demographic that really stands out in terms of needing to know more is young Americans, 18 to 29, a majority, 53% say they need to learn more. And then if you look at minority demographics, 41% of Black Americans, 43% of Hispanic Americans, and 44% of non-white, non-college educated voters say they need to know more. This underscores the danger of the strategy that they have been pursuing, which has been, we'll call it the generic Democrat strategy of like, we're going to say as little as possible. We're not even, they just put the issues page up on their website under pressure. She did give, a speech about some of the things she wanted to do, but she has been very cautious in terms of, putting herself out in front of the media. They haven't been leaning in hard to specifics in terms of an agenda. And so you end up in this situation where instead of being Barack Obama, where everybody projects on you whatever they want to see, instead they're looking at her and going, I don't really know who you are, what you want to do. So, this is the risk.
Yeah, and it's a risk because Joe Biden had a built-in excuse for running the basement campaign, okay? He's old. So a lot of people can just say, well, I don't know, Biden is old, he doesn't have the energy, so we get it. He can't do that many campaign events, okay? He can't do that many interviews. He's just old, right? Until, people saw that he was not only just old, but he was mentally falling apart, right? Deteriorating in front of our eyes on the world stage at the CNN debate. And then they said, okay, he can't be president. But there was some plausible deniability there, right? When he was in the basement, in the sense that you could say, well, we didn't really know, okay, that he was mentally falling apart, even though it was obvious. But again, he had a built-in excuse. Kamala doesn't have that built-in excuse because she's not old, right? She's not 80 plus years old. So there's no reason why she shouldn't be out doing more interviews and being more upfront about her policy positions and not hiding in the basement. So I think what's happening is that a lot of people are being turned off because they don't know what to believe about her positions and where she stands. Nobody knows what she really believes because she's not really talking, okay? All of the policies that she's putting out there are through aides, emails, campaign spokespersons, things like that, but not her, right? She's not really saying anything. And that CNN interview did not seem to help her, right? Which is the reason why she's not doing interviews, because we know that the more that Kamala gets exposed to the public, the more people say, nah, I'm not voting for this, right? And that's what's happening right now. And you're starting to see it show up in the polls because Kamala Harris is significantly trailing her predecessors like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. For example, in September 2016, this same New York Times poll, which is an A+ poll, by the way, according to the liberal media. Okay, so this is as accurate as it gets, right? Again, according to the media. They had Clinton up +2 at the time. Trump went on to win that election. In September 2020, this same poll had Biden up +8. Now, we know what happened in that election, okay? So when you look at it from a historical perspective, this poll is terrible, right? This is the worst poll for a Democrat nominee in almost a decade, right? Going into an election. So this is a big problem for Kamala Harris because she's doing worse than her predecessors, not just when it comes to overall numbers, but also when it comes to key demographics that Kamala Harris is supposed to be doing well with, right? She's supposed to be doing better than somebody like Joe Biden because, Joe Biden's white and she's a so-called person of color. So therefore, the so-called people of color are supposed to support her more so than they would a white man, but that's not happening, okay? Biden was doing better among Hispanics and blacks at the same point in time than Kamala Harris is doing right now. Again, Biden is doing better with so-called minorities than Kamala Harris. That's an absolute disaster, right? That is not news that you want to hear, okay? So with that being said, the mainstream liberal media, outlets like MSNBC, they are coping and seething over this liberal poll showing that Kamala Harris is not doing well right now. Take a look.
And the same New York Times poll shows this race nationally is a toss-up right now. 1 point separates Harris and Trump, again, within the margin of error. But look at who people see as the change candidate. 53% say Trump represents major change, just 25% for Harris. Maybe seems counterintuitive since Trump was already president. He hasn't stopped talking about 2020. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that change number should be higher because Trump would represent the greatest change in the history of the American Republic. He would take our democracy and turn it into an authoritarian strongman, likely dictatorship on day one, his own words, not mine. So those numbers don't surprise me. But look, I think with Kamala Harris, tomorrow's debate, You got to understand, this is the last major event before Election Day. Now, people think Election Day in November. Not true. Election Day starts next week when ballots in Pennsylvania will begin being cast. So this is really an opportunity for her to, yes, as Chris says, draw some policy contrast. But I don't think it's really about that. I think it's about showing that voters can trust her, that she is a credible commander-in-chief, that she is ready to assume and become president and lead our country into a stable growth. We've had tremendous economic success over these last 4 years under Harris and Biden. And if she can continue to make that case and let Trump be Trump, he will not be able to resist with the insults, with the demeaning things, and he wants to make it a mud fight. If she can rise above that, be ready for that first zinger and switch pages quickly, I think she's going to be in strong shape.
Yeah, so that's MSNBC. Clearly high off copium, right? Seething over a brutal reality check from this New York Times poll that not only is Trump up, okay, yeah, within the margin of error, but again, a lot of these polls have been in margin of error, to be quite honest with you. I mean, it's always been a close race. Regardless, she's doing historically bad. You also have people believing that Trump is the candidate of change, right? And, I think it's fascinating because Kamala Harris talks about not wanting to go back. That's basically one of her woke campaign slogans, right? We're not going back, okay? A dog whistle to woke liberal women. That's what it is. But I think a lot of America does want to go back, right? They do want to go back to the way that the border was and the economy was under the Trump administration, right? They want to go back to America with lower crime, okay, lower interest rates, better economic opportunity. Yeah, I think Americans do want to go back, right? So her messaging is backfire in and of itself. And I said that when she first rolled that out, we're not going back, right? I was like, I'm not sure if that's the campaign slogan I would go with, considering how a vast majority of the American people do want to go back, right? They want to go back when it comes to the most important things like the economy and immigration, right? So I think a lot of things about her campaign is just backfiring. I think that when you come out here and you talk about not going back, okay, and you talk about going forward, but yet people don't know what forward means, a lot of people are going to have questions. And because people have questions, because people are uncertain, and Kamala Harris, over the course of a month, has still not given people the answers to their questions, I think it's turning a lot of people off, right? I think the same thing happened to Hillary Clinton in the sense that Hillary Clinton was very obviously fake. Now, she was definitely more transparent than Kamala Harris, but the fakeness, the phoniness is something that the American people tend to reject, right? I think the American people tend to like authenticity. Whether you like Trump or not, you know that he's authentic, right? With Kamala Harris, not so much, okay? So I want to react to this CNN clip that is really going to focus in on where Kamala Harris is struggling at the state level. Particularly, she's struggling in the Midwest, and I want to talk about it because this is fascinating. Even CNN, they're sounding the alarm on Kamala Harris now when it comes to some of these numbers.
Kind of put some meat on the bones, right, and do a better job than I did of just circling Pennsylvania.
I'm going to be additive. I couldn't do a better job. I'm just going to make the product you've made even better. So I just want to take a look at Pennsylvania, and what we see is a tightening race in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. All right, this is Harris versus Trump margin in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. A month ago, when you looked at the polls, New York Times +4 Harris, +3 Quinnipiac for Harris, Franklin and Marshall +3 for Harris. But look at polls that have come out over the last week or so, and what do we see? We see a much tighter race. We see a tie in the CBS YouGov poll. We see a tie in the CNN SSRS poll. And this, to me, is part of an emerging pattern which is in a very pivotal state. What we saw was a small Harris lead, but within the margin of error, becoming a race that is way too close to call at this particular point, one that is even.
You say very pivotal the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania could be. How pivotal?
How pivotal. All right, so let's take a look at this particular map. This is with the betting favorites, but with Kamala Harris taking the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania over here. What do we see? We see that Kamala Harris wins in this particular case. Look at that, with exactly 270 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 268. All right, so Kamala Harris wins the Electoral College when she wins the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But let's take Pennsylvania out of Kamala Harris's column and put him into Donald Trump's column. Again, with the betting favorites, with Trump taking Pennsylvania. What happens when we turn Pennsylvania red? Well, take a look here. Donald Trump wins in the Electoral College, 287 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 251 electoral votes. So that is why I say it is pivotal. Yeah.
It is so important.
Yeah, so the issue with Kamala Harris in these swing states, like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, is with male voters. She's actually losing male voters at a faster rate than she is gaining female voters, right? So her advantage is supposed to be, well, Kamala is going to attract more females. However, it seems as if that is backfiring because it's a double-edged sword in the sense that, yes, you're gaining more female voters, but you're losing male voters at a faster rate, which overall can be a net negative for Kamala Harris. And that's what's happening in states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada. And you can see that Kamala Harris has to win Pennsylvania. If she does not win Pennsylvania, she would have a very, very, very difficult time becoming president, right? She basically has to win Pennsylvania. If she loses Pennsylvania, it's over, right? And in Pennsylvania, she is losing white male voters, the same voters that were fine with Joe Biden for whatever reason. But now that Kamala Harris on the ticket, they're like, nah, we're going to pass on this, right? So that's what's happening, okay? And it's a big problem because Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz for that reason, to try to get those voters on board. But it turns out that the men of Pennsylvania are not low T, right? I'm just saying. Right, they're not low T, okay? Like, you know, Tim Walz, okay? They're not effeminate, okay? They do not have questionable behaviors, and it seems like somebody like Tim Walz is probably turning them off, right? Because a lot of men are backing away from the Democrat Party because they don't see the Democrat Party as a party for men. In fact, 60% of Democrat voters are basically women, and men are running away from the Democrat Party in droves, right? So that is what's happening, and that is why Kamala Harris is struggling in Pennsylvania, and why you see the race tightening, okay? And really, to be quite honest with you, Trump is probably in the lead.
It's worth adding letters, I will say.
It's worth adding letters. I can't even get it out. The bottom line is it is so important. This state is very, very important.
You important data people like to call it a tipping point state. It looks like Pennsylvania could be the tipping point state, which means the one state that will decide the election. Now, if it is in fact the tipping point state, is there any elected official in Pennsylvania who may have been on a ticket that might have made a difference?
Well, this was the great question when Kamala Harris was making her VP selection. Who should she select? And of course, folks like myself thought that she should take Josh Shapiro, of course, as the governor of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Why? Because his approval rating is 59%. And the bottom line is, if Kamala Harris loses in the state of Pennsylvania, and that is the tipping point state, as Mr. Berman put it, the state that put Donald Trump over the top in the Electoral College, there are going to be some real questions as to whether Kamala Harris should have chosen Josh Shapiro, given how popular he is in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Could she have been a winner if she had chosen him instead of Tim Walz? We don't know the answer to that question. We don't know who's going to win the state of Pennsylvania, but it's certainly a question that at this particular moment, with the Pennsylvania polls getting tighter and tighter and tighter, that I'm certainly asking, John.
Harry, and great to see you, as always.
Yeah, I think she made a miscalculation, a big miscalculation with picking Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro, because the only reason that Josh Shapiro wasn't picked is because he's a Jew. Right? But when you think about it, it makes sense. Men are running away from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz because that ticket is it's a very feminine ticket. I mean, you already have Kamala Harris, who's a woman, and then you got Tim Walz, who's a feminine man, right? So it's like if Kamala Harris would have put Josh Shapiro on the ticket, I don't think she'd be having the same issues with men, because I think Josh Shapiro has a more masculine appeal, even though he's a Democrat. So you really can only have so much of that because he is a Democrat at the end of the day. But regardless, it wouldn't have been as bad as Tim Walz, right? And she probably would have been able to overcome the whole Jew thing, right? Because she probably would have had a better chance of winning Pennsylvania, and she would have kept a lot of men that she's now losing in some of these key states. So it just seems as if a lot of decisions that she made are backfiring, including her VP pick, her campaign strategy. It's just not looking good right now for her. And they're probably panicking behind closed doors, right? They're probably panicking, okay? Obama, Nancy Pelosi, all of them. They're probably saying, we were right. She should not have been the nominee. We should have staged the coup part 2, right? We should have did that on her at the DNC, and we would have had a better candidate. And Josh Shapiro is probably breathing a sigh of relief because he doesn't have to go down with this dumpster fire. And if Kamala loses, that will line him up to run in 2028. And he doesn't have to be associated with this disaster. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.